The small house on Maple Street looked like every other house on the block. White walls, a red front door, and a tiny garden where Sarah Martinez tried to grow tomatoes each summer. Inside, the evening was starting like any other Tuesday in October. Sarah stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of pasta sauce while keeping one eye on the baby monitor sitting on the counter. The monitor was new. They had bought it just 2 weeks ago after their old one stopped working. This one was fancy, David had said. It could pick up sounds from far away and had a special filter to block out background noise. Sarah liked it because she could hear Emma breathing even when she was downstairs. Emma was 18 months old now. She had curly brown hair and her father's dark eyes. She loved to babble and point at everything, asking, "What's that?" in her tiny voice. Tonight she had gone to bed easily, tired from playing at the park all afternoon. Sarah had read her 3 stories, sung 2 songs, and watched as Emma's eyes slowly closed. By 8 o'clock, Emma was fast asleep in her crib. David was at work. He worked night shifts at Tampa General Hospital, watching the security cameras and walking the halls to make sure everything was safe. He had been a Marine before Emma was born. He served 2 tours overseas before coming home and trying to build a normal life. The hospital job was not exciting, but it paid the bills and let him use his training to help people. Sarah missed him on nights like this. The house felt too quiet with just her and Emma. She turned on the television for company while she cooked, keeping the volume low so she could hear the baby monitor if Emma woke up. That was when she first heard it. A crackling sound came through the monitor. Not the normal static that happens sometimes, but something different, something that sounded almost like a pattern. Sarah turned down the television and listened closer. The sound continued. Short bursts, long bursts, pauses, then more bursts. It reminded her of something, but she could not think of what. She picked up the monitor and looked at it. The green light was on, showing it was working. The sound kept coming through, steady and deliberate. Sarah walked to the stairs and listened. She could not hear anything unusual from Emma's room. The crackling was not coming from there. Maybe it was interference from a neighbor's device. Their street was packed with houses close together. Everyone had baby monitors, wireless speakers, and all kinds of electronics. Sarah had read online that sometimes signals could cross and pick up sounds from other houses. She went back to the kitchen and stirred the sauce. The crackling continued. Sarah tried to ignore it, but something about the pattern bothered her. It was too regular to be random static, too purposeful. She pulled out her phone and opened the voice recording app. If David came home and the sound was gone, he would think she was imagining things. She held the phone near the monitor and recorded for 30 seconds. The crackling came through clearly on the recording. Sarah played it back and listened again. Short, short, short. Long, long, long. Short, short, short. Over and over, a memory tugged at the back of her mind. Something from a movie she had watched or a book she had read, but she was too tired to think clearly. Emma had been up 3 times the night before with a stuffy nose, and Sarah had not slept well in days. She saved the recording and sent it to David with a text message. New monitor picking up weird sounds. Think it's interference from neighbors? David would not see it until his break at 10 o'clock. Sarah turned off the stove and put a lid on the sauce. She was not hungry anymore. The crackling sound had unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She walked through the house, checking the windows and doors. Everything was locked. This was a safe neighborhood. In 5 years of living here, the worst thing that had happened was someone stealing a package from a front porch 2 streets over, but Sarah could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. She went upstairs to check on Emma. Her daughter was sleeping peacefully, one arm thrown over her head, her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Sarah stood in the doorway and watched her breathe. The room smelled like baby lotion and lavender from the nightlight Sarah plugged in each evening. Everything was fine. Everything was normal. Sarah went back downstairs and tried to watch television, but she could not focus. The crackling kept coming through the monitor. She turned it off and then turned it back on. The sound was still there. She unplugged it and plugged it back in. The sound returned after a few seconds. At 9:30, she called David. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, is everything okay?" His voice was alert, concerned. Sarah never called during his shift unless something was wrong. "I'm fine. Emma's fine. But this new monitor is picking up really strange sounds. I sent you a recording. Can you listen to it when you get a chance? Hold on." She heard rustling and clicking as David pulled up his messages. There was silence for a moment. Then his voice changed. It became focused and serious. The voice he used when something important was happening. Sarah, how long has this been going on? I don't know. Maybe an hour. I noticed it when I was making dinner. Why? What is it? I need you to record more of it. As much as you can. And send me the files. David, you're scaring me. What's wrong? He was quiet for a second. Then he said, It might be nothing. But that sound you recorded, it's Morse code. Sarah's stomach dropped. What, are you sure? Pretty sure. I learned it in the Marines. Basic stuff. But Sarah, if I'm reading it right, that pattern you sent me, it's SOS. The room suddenly felt colder. Sarah looked at the monitor sitting on the coffee table. The crackling continued unchanged. SOS, she repeated, like a distress signal. Yeah, can you still hear it now? Sarah walked to the monitor and listened. Yes, it's still going. Okay, keep recording. I'm going to try to decode more of it. Don't go outside. Lock the doors and wait for me to call you back. David, I'm scared. I know, but you're safe. Emma's safe. Just stay inside and let me figure this out. I'll call you in 10 minutes. He hung up. Sarah stood in her living room, staring at the baby monitor. The crackling continued, steady and persistent. Somewhere out there, someone was sending a distress signal, and somehow their baby monitor was picking it up. Sarah grabbed her phone and started recording again. Her hands were shaking. She did not know who was sending the signal or where it was coming from. But she knew one thing for certain. This was not a normal Tuesday night anymore. Outside her window, the street was dark and quiet. The neighboring houses showed warm lights in their windows. Everything looked peaceful, but Sarah knew that somewhere close by something was very wrong, and she and David had just stumbled into the middle of it. The monitor crackled on. Short, short, short. Long, long, long. Short, short, short SOS. Help us. SOS. Sarah sat down and waited for David to call back, listening to the desperate message that cut through the quiet October night. David called back in 8 minutes, not 10. Sarah grabbed the phone before it could ring twice. I decoded more of it, David said without greeting. His voice was tight and controlled. It's definitely SOS, and there's more. It says help basement over and over. SOS help basement. Sarah's mind raced. Our house doesn't have a basement, I know. But the Chens do. Their house is right next to ours. Mr. Chen lived next door with his daughter and grandchildren. Sarah had met them a few times when they first moved in. Mr. Chen was quiet and kind, always working in his garden. His daughter Lisa had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. They visited often, especially on weekends. You think the signal is coming from their house? Sarah asked. The monitor picks up signals from about 100 feet away. Their basement is probably that close to Emma's room. Sarah, I need you to do something for me. Go outside and look at their house. Tell me if you see anything unusual. Any lights on or off. Any cars in the driveway, anything. Sarah did not want to go outside, but she trusted David. She unlocked the front door and stepped onto the porch. The October air was cool against her skin. She looked at the Chen house. Everything looked normal. The porch light was on. So was a light in the upstairs window. Mr. Chen's car was in the driveway, an old blue sedan he had driven for years. Nothing seemed wrong. It looks fine, Sarah reported. Lights are on. His car is there. Any movement? Can you see anyone inside? Sarah squinted at the windows. The curtains were drawn. She could not see anything. No? Should I go knock on the door? No. David's answer was immediate and firm. Absolutely not. If someone is sending a distress signal from that basement, it means something bad is happening. We don't know who's in that house or what's going on. Sarah went back inside and locked the door. Her heart was pounding. What do we do? I'm thinking. She could hear David breathing, could almost see him pacing like he did when he was working through a problem. This could be nothing. Maybe someone's playing with an old radio. Maybe it's some kind of interference that just sounds like Morse code. But you don't think so? No, I don't. That signal is too clear, too deliberate. Someone is sending it on purpose. We should call the police. David was quiet for a moment. And tell them what? That our baby monitor picked up Morse code. They'll think we're crazy. We have no proof that anyone's in danger. For all we know, Mr. Chen is fine and teaching his grandkids Morse code for a school project. Sarah knew he was right, but something in her gut told her this was real. So we just ignore it? No, I'm coming home. My shift ends at 6 in the morning, but I'll tell them I have a family emergency. I should be there in 40 minutes. Don't open the door for anyone except me. Keep recording that signal. And Sarah, keep your phone with you. After they hung up, Sarah went upstairs and stood in Emma's doorway again. Her daughter was still sleeping, unaware that anything strange was happening. Sarah watched the gentle rise and fall of her chest and felt a fierce protective instinct wash over her. She went back downstairs with her phone and the monitor. The crackling continued. She recorded it in 5-minute segments, stopping and starting to save the files. She must have recorded 30 minutes of the signal by the time she heard David's truck pull into the driveway. He came through the door quickly and locked it behind him. He was still wearing his security uniform, his name tag pinned to his chest. He looked tired but focused. "Let me hear it," he said. Sarah played the recordings. David listened with his eyes closed, his lips moving slightly as he translated the patterns in his head. When the recording ended, he opened his eyes. It's definitely a distress call. SOS, help, basement. Those same words repeating. Someone over there knows Morse code and has access to some kind of transmitter. What kind of transmitter? Could be anything. An old ham radio. A signal device. Even tapping on metal pipes in a certain rhythm can transmit if someone knows what they're doing. David ran his hand through his hair. But here's the thing. If someone's sending this signal, it means they can't call for help normally. They can't reach a phone. They can't get out. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. "We have to call the police," Sarah said. "I know, but we need to be smart about this. We call the non-emergency line first. We explain calmly. We show them the recordings. We ask for a welfare check on the Chens." David pulled out his phone and dialed. Sarah listened as he explained the situation to the dispatcher. His voice was professional and clear. He gave his name, his address, his military background. He explained about the Morse code and the baby monitor. He requested a welfare check on the neighbors. The dispatcher asked several questions. David answered each one patiently. Finally, she said someone would be sent to investigate. It could be 20 minutes or an hour, depending on how busy the night was. David thanked her and hung up. He looked at Sarah. Now we wait. They sat together on the couch, the baby monitor between them. The crackling continued. Neither of them spoke much. They were both thinking about what might be happening next door, both imagining scenarios they did not want to voice. Sarah thought about Lisa, Mr. Chen's daughter. She had seemed nice the few times they talked. She worked as a teacher somewhere. She always smiled and waved when she saw Sarah in the yard. Her kids were young, maybe 6 and 8 years old. Sarah had seen them playing in the Chen's backyard, running through the sprinkler last summer. What if something had happened to them? What if they were in danger right now, just 100 feet away, while Sarah and David sat in their living room waiting for the police? "I should go over there," David said suddenly. "I should at least knock on the door and see if anyone answers." The dispatcher said to wait for the police. "I know what she said. But if someone's in trouble over there, every minute counts." David stood up and walked to the window. He pulled back the curtain and looked at the Chen house. "I'm trained for this kind of thing. I can assess the situation without putting myself in danger. Or you could get hurt. Or make things worse." Sarah stood up too. "David, please. Just wait for the police. They'll be here soon." He turned to look at her. She could see the conflict in his eyes. The Marine part of him wanted to act, wanted to help, but the father part of him knew he had a responsibility to stay safe for his own family. "You're right," he said finally. He came back to the couch and sat down. "You're right. We wait." 23 minutes later, headlights appeared on the street. A patrol car pulled up in front of the Chen house. Sarah and David went to the window and watched as a police officer got out. She was tall and wore her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She walked to the Chen's front door and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time. Still no answer. The officer pulled out her radio and spoke into it. Then she walked around the side of the house, shining her flashlight at the windows. David opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. "Officer?" She turned and walked over to their yard. Up close, Sarah could see her name tag. "Officer Williams, you're David Martinez? The one who called this in?" "Yes, ma'am. This is my wife, Sarah. We're the ones who picked up the Morse code signal." Officer Williams looked skeptical but professional. "I need to hear the recording." David pulled out his phone and played it. Officer Williams listened carefully, her expression neutral. When it finished, she said, "You're certain this is Morse code?" "I am." I learned it in the Marines. Basic communications training. That signal is SOS help basement. I'd stake my life on it. Officer Williams studied him for a moment as if weighing his credibility. Then she nodded. Show me where your baby monitor is positioned. They brought her inside and showed her Emma's room, the monitor, everything. Officer Williams took notes and asked more questions. How long had they heard the signal? Had they seen anyone at the Chen house? Did they know the family well? David answered everything. Sarah added details when she could. Officer Williams called for backup. I'm going to check the basement windows, she said. If I see anything concerning, we'll enter the property. Sarah and David stood on their porch and watched as Officer Williams walked back to the Chen house. She disappeared around the side where the basement windows would be. For several long minutes, nothing happened. Then Officer Williams appeared again, moving quickly. She spoke urgently into her radio. Within seconds, she was calling for more backup. David grabbed Sarah's hand. They looked at each other and Sarah saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. Something was very wrong in the house next door. And they had been right to call for help. 3 more patrol cars arrived within minutes. Their lights flashed red and blue across the quiet street, and neighbors started coming out of their houses to see what was happening. Sarah watched from the porch as Officer Williams spoke with the other officers. They were all looking at the Chen house now, their faces serious. One of the officers approached David and Sarah. He was older, with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that said he had seen a lot in his career. I'm Sergeant Coleman, he said. Officer Williams tells me you picked up a distress signal on your baby monitor. She also says she saw signs of disturbance through the basement window, overturned furniture, possibly someone tied up, though she couldn't see clearly. Sarah felt her legs go weak. David put his arm around her waist to steady her. We're going to breach the door, Sergeant Coleman continued. I need you both to go inside your house and stay away from the windows. If there's someone dangerous in there, we don't know how they'll react. David nodded. Understood. Is there anything we can do to help? You've already helped by calling this in. Now let us do our job. They went inside, but Sarah could not stay away from the window. She stood to the side where she could see without being directly in view. David stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders. 4 officers approached the Chen's front door. Sergeant Coleman knocked hard and identified himself as police. Tampa Police Department. We need you to open the door. No response, he knocked again. This is the police. Open the door now or we will enter by force. Still nothing. Sergeant Coleman nodded to one of the other officers who stepped forward with a heavy tool Sarah recognized from movies. A battering ram. With 2 strong hits, the door burst open. The officers entered quickly, their flashlights cutting through the darkness inside the house. Sarah could hear them shouting, Police, show your hands. Police. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Sarah barely breathed. Then she saw officers emerging from the house, and they were not alone. They were helping people out. First came Mr. Chen, leaning heavily on an officer's arm. He looked weak and disoriented. Then came a woman Sarah recognized as Lisa, Mr. Chen's daughter. She was crying. 2 small children followed, a boy and a girl, both looking scared and confused. Oh my God, Sarah whispered. They're alive. An ambulance that had been waiting down the street pulled up. Paramedics rushed to the family and began checking them over. Sarah could see them wrapping blankets around everyone's shoulders, checking pulses, shining lights in eyes. Then she saw 2 officers leading 2 men out of the house in handcuffs. The men were young, maybe in their 20s, and they looked angry. One of them was shouting something Sarah could not hear. Sergeant Coleman came back to their porch 15 minutes later. His expression was grim but satisfied. You saved 4 lives tonight, he said without preamble. That family has been held hostage in their basement for 3 days. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. David's grip on her hand tightened. 3 days, David repeated. What happened? Sergeant Coleman sighed. Home invasion on Saturday night. 2 suspects broke in planning to rob the place. They thought the house would be empty, but the family was home. Instead of running, the suspects decided to keep them hostage while they searched for valuables. They've been keeping them tied up in the basement, coming and going as they pleased. Sarah thought about the last 3 days. She had been going about her normal life, playing with Emma, cooking dinner, watching television. And the whole time, right next door, a family was being held prisoner. How did they send the Morse code signal? David asked. Turns out Mr. Chen is a retired radio operator. He kept an old ham radio set up in his basement. One of his hobbies. Lisa, his daughter, was a Girl Scout leader years ago and learned Morse code for a communications badge. When one of the suspects went upstairs to sleep, and the other went out to pawn stolen items, Lisa managed to work her hands free enough to reach the radio equipment. She couldn't speak or they'd hear her, but she could tap out Morse code on the transmitter key. "She's a hero," Sarah said. "She is. So are you two. If you hadn't been paying attention, if you hadn't called it in, we might not have found them until it was too late. These guys were getting nervous. We found evidence they were planning to move the family or worse." Sarah did not want to think about what or worse meant. She looked over at the ambulance where Lisa sat with her children. The little girl was curled up against her mother's side. The boy was crying. Lisa was talking to them softly, stroking their hair. "Are they going to be okay?" Sarah asked. "Physically, yes. They're dehydrated and have some minor injuries from being restrained, but nothing life-threatening. Mentally and emotionally, that's going to take time, but they're alive and they're together. That's what matters." Sergeant Coleman asked them a few more questions for his report, then thanked them again and went back to coordinate with the other officers. Sarah and David stood on their porch and watched as the paramedics loaded Mr. Chen into the ambulance. He was going to the hospital for observation. Lisa and the children would follow in a second ambulance that had just arrived. Before Lisa climbed into the ambulance, she looked over at the Martinez house. Her eyes met Sarah's across the dark yards. Lisa raised one hand in a small wave. Sarah waved back, tears streaming down her face. The ambulances pulled away, their sirens quiet but their lights still flashing. The police cars followed. Within an hour, the street was quiet again. The only evidence of what had happened was the broken front door of the Chen house, and some police tape stretched across the entrance. David and Sarah went inside. They were exhausted but too wound up to sleep. They sat on the couch in silence for a long time. "I can't believe they were right next door," Sarah finally said. "All that time and we had no idea. You can't think like that. We couldn't have known. The important thing is that you noticed something was wrong tonight. You trusted your instincts." Sarah looked at the baby monitor still sitting on the coffee table. The crackling had stopped. No more distress signals. Just the quiet sound of Emma breathing in her sleep upstairs. "That monitor saved their lives," she said. "You saved their lives. You and that monitor together." They went upstairs to check on Emma. She was still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the drama that had unfolded around her. Sarah adjusted the blanket around her daughter's shoulders and kissed her forehead. In the morning, the local news was at their door. A reporter had heard about the rescue on the police scanner and tracked down the story. She wanted to interview David and Sarah about how they discovered the Morse code signal. At first, they said no. They did not want attention, but David changed his mind after talking to Sergeant Coleman on the phone. He said it might help other people pay attention to unusual things in their neighborhoods. David explained to Sarah, "If we tell the story, maybe someone else will notice something wrong and speak up. Maybe we can prevent this from happening to another family." So they agreed to one interview. They sat on their couch while the reporter asked questions. They explained about the baby monitor, the strange crackling, David's military training that helped him recognize Morse code. The cameraman filmed the monitor in Emma's room. "You must feel like heroes," the reporter said. David shook his head. "The hero is Lisa Chen. She stayed calm in an impossible situation and found a way to call for help. We just happened to hear her call." The story aired that evening on the local news. Sarah and David watched it together after putting Emma to bed. It felt strange seeing themselves on television, hearing their own voices telling the story of that night. But what they did not know was how far that story would travel. By the next morning, the clip had been shared on social media. First on local Tampa pages, then on state pages, then on national news sites. People were fascinated by the story. A baby monitor picking up a Morse code distress signal. A former Marine who recognized the call for help. A family saved at the last moment. The story went viral. Within 3 days, it had been shared millions of times. News outlets across the country picked it up. Then international news. People in other countries were hearing about the Martinez family and the Chens. Sarah's phone would not stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. Talk shows wanted them as guests. Strangers were commenting on their social media accounts, praising them as heroes. It was overwhelming. Sarah and David tried to decline most of the attention. They had jobs and a baby to take care of. They did not want to be famous. They just wanted to go back to their normal lives. But then something unexpected happened. David received a phone call from a number he did not recognize. When he answered, a professional-sounding woman introduced herself. "Mr. Martinez, my name is Jennifer Ross. I work for John Cena's management team. I don't know if you're familiar with John, but he's a professional wrestler and actor. He saw your story on the news and he was very moved by your actions. He wanted to reach out personally." David almost dropped the phone. "John Cena? The wrestler?" "Yes, sir. John is a big supporter of military veterans and first responders. Your military background and quick thinking really resonated with him. He'd like to meet you and your family if you're willing." David looked at Sarah with wide eyes. She had been listening to the conversation, trying to figure out who was calling. Sarah thought David was playing a prank when he told her about the phone call. John Cena wanted to meet them. It sounded impossible. But Jennifer Ross called back the next day and explained everything in detail. John had seen the viral video of their interview. He read about David's military service and how he saved the Chen family. John wanted to fly to Tampa to meet them in person. "He does this kind of thing," Jennifer explained to Sarah over the phone. "John has granted over 600 wishes for sick children through the Make-A-Wish Foundation. He supports veterans and first responders. Your story touched him deeply." Sarah still felt like she was dreaming. She had watched John Cena on television before. David was a huge wrestling fan and sometimes watched old matches on the weekends. John Cena was famous, wealthy, and incredibly busy. Why would he care about a regular family in Tampa? But Jennifer assured her it was real. They scheduled a visit for the following week. John would fly in on a Thursday morning and spend the afternoon with the Martinez family. "No cameras, no media. Just a private visit. He wants to thank your husband personally for his service and his heroism," Jennifer said. "And he's bringing some gifts for Emma." After the call ended, Sarah and David sat in stunned silence. This was really happening. But as the initial shock wore off, new worries crept in. The viral attention had brought more than just positive messages. Some people on the internet were cruel. They accused David and Sarah of making up the story for attention. Others criticized them for going to the media. Worst of all, they started receiving threatening messages. The messages came through social media and email. Most were just angry words from strangers. But some were more specific and more frightening. One message said, "You took my brother away. You'll pay for this." David showed the messages to Sergeant Coleman, who confirmed what they feared. The two men arrested for the home invasion had family members who were angry about the arrests. These family members blamed David and Sarah for their relatives going to jail. "We're taking the threats seriously," Sergeant Coleman said. "I've increased patrols on your street and we're investigating the source of these messages. But I want you to be careful. Vary your routine. Pay attention to anyone following you. Consider staying somewhere else for a few days." Sarah felt sick. They had done the right thing by calling the police. They had saved 4 people's lives. And now they were being threatened because of it. They could not afford to stay in a hotel, especially not for more than a night or two. David's hospital salary and Sarah's part-time work at a dental office covered their bills, but there was not much left over. They had a little savings for emergencies, but they needed that money for things like car repairs or if Emma got sick. David called his supervisor at the hospital and explained the situation. They agreed to let him work different shifts temporarily, so people would not know exactly when he was coming and going. Sarah's boss at the dental office did the same for her, but they still lived in their house. They still had to go about their lives, and they were scared. That fear was still there when Thursday arrived and John Cena came to visit. A black SUV pulled up in front of their house at 2 in the afternoon. Jennifer Ross got out first, followed by 2 large men who Sarah assumed were security guards. Then John Cena stepped out of the vehicle. He was bigger in person than he looked on television, tall and muscular, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt. But what struck Sarah most was his smile. It was warm and genuine as he walked up to their front door. David answered the door before John could knock. The 2 men shook hands, and Sarah saw David's eyes get a little watery. John Cena was one of his heroes, someone he had watched for years, and now that hero was standing in their living room. "It's an honor to meet you," John said, and his voice was sincere. "What you did was incredible. Not many people would have noticed that signal. Even fewer would have known what it meant." "I was just using my training," David said humbly. "No. You were being alert and aware. You were ready to help when help was needed. That's what makes someone a hero." John sat down on their couch and spent the next hour just talking with them. He asked about David's time in the Marines where he served, what his job was like now. He asked Sarah about Emma and what it was like being a parent. He was funny and kind and seemed genuinely interested in their lives. Emma woke up from her nap halfway through the visit. Sarah brought her downstairs, a little worried about how her daughter would react to a stranger. But John was amazing with her. He spoke to her gently, made funny faces until she giggled, and gave her a stuffed toy of one of his wrestling characters. "That's for when she's older," John said, "so she can remember that weird day when a wrestler showed up at her house." Then John's expression grew more serious. "Jennifer told me about the threats you've been receiving. That's not okay. No one should be punished for doing the right thing." "The police are handling it," David said. "We're being careful. I want to help with that. My team has connections with some excellent security consultants. They work with celebrities and public figures who receive threats. They can assess your home, give you advice, even install some security measures if needed. I'll cover the cost." Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but John held up his hand. "Please, let me do this. You saved 4 people because you paid attention and took action. The least I can do is help make sure you're safe." He pulled out his phone and made a call right there. Within minutes, he had arranged for a security consultant to visit their home the next day. The consultant would do a full assessment and recommend changes. John would pay for everything, but he did not stop there. Jennifer handed him a folder and John opened it. "I heard you had to change your work schedules because of the threats. That probably means you're losing some income. I want to help with that too." He handed David an envelope. "This should cover a few months of expenses while things settle down." David opened the envelope and his eyes went wide. Sarah leaned over to look. There was a check inside for $10,000. "We can't accept this," David said immediately. "This is too much." "Yes, you can. And you will. Because you have a daughter to take care of and bills to pay. You shouldn't have to struggle financially because you did something brave." Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. She had been so worried about money, about how they would manage if the threats continued and they had to keep changing their schedules. This money would let them breathe. It would give them time to figure things out without panicking about every bill. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much," John smiled at her. "You're welcome. But I'm not done yet. I also want to meet the Chen family. Are they still in the hospital?" "Mr. Chen came home yesterday," David said. "Lisa and the kids are staying with her sister across town for a while. They're afraid to go back to the house." "Understandable. Can you give me their contact information? I'd like to visit them too if they're comfortable with that." David gave John the information for Lisa's sister's house. John made another call and arranged to visit them that evening. Before he left, John asked if he could take some photos with the family. Not for the media, he explained, just for themselves. Something they could keep and remember this day. They took pictures in the living room with Emma sitting on John's lap. They took pictures on the front porch. Sarah's favorite was one where John and David were shaking hands, both of them smiling, while Emma reached up from David's arms to touch John's face. "You're good people," John said as he was leaving. "Don't let anyone tell you different. What you did mattered. It will always matter." After he left, Sarah and David sat in their living room in silence. The envelope with the check sat on the coffee table. Emma was playing with her new stuffed toy, babbling happily. "Did that really just happen?" Sarah asked. David laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. "I think so. But I'm not sure I believe it yet." The security consultant came the next day as promised. He was professional and thorough. He walked through their entire house, checked all the doors and windows, looked at their locks and lighting. He made a list of recommendations, things like better deadbolts, motion sensor lights, and a camera doorbell. "Most of this is simple stuff," he explained. "It won't make you completely safe from a determined attacker, but it will make your home a harder target. And it will let you see who's at your door before you open it." The consultant's company installed everything within 3 days. John Cena's team paid for all of it, just as he had promised. Sarah felt safer immediately. The new lights made their yard bright at night. The doorbell camera let them see visitors before they got to the door. The new locks were strong and solid. The police caught 2 of the people making threats online. They were charged with making terroristic threats and harassment. The others seemed to fade away once they realized the police were investigating. The patrol cars continued to drive by several times a day. Slowly, life started to feel normal again. The viral story began to fade from social media. News outlets moved on to other stories. David and Sarah could go to work without constantly looking over their shoulders. But then Cena posted about his visit on his social media accounts. He did not share the photos from their house, keeping that private as he had promised. But he did write a long post about meeting David and Sarah, praising their awareness and courage. He wrote about the importance of veterans using their skills to help their communities. He wrote about being a good neighbor and paying attention to the world around you. The post got millions of likes and shares. The Martinez family story went viral all over again, but this time it felt different. This time, Cena's massive following was sharing it with respect and admiration. The mean comments and threats did not come back. Instead, people shared their own stories of times they noticed something wrong and helped someone in need. The local news wanted another interview, this time about Cena's visit. David and Sarah agreed, but only if they could share something important. The reporter came back to their house on a Saturday afternoon. This time, Sarah and David had a clear message they wanted to share. They were not the only heroes in this story. Lisa Chen deserved recognition for her incredible courage and quick thinking. She was the one who saved her family, David told the camera. She stayed calm in an impossible situation and found a way to send a signal for help. Without her knowledge of Morse code and her bravery in reaching that radio equipment, we never would have known they were in danger. The reporter took that message and ran with it. The next news story focused on Lisa's resourcefulness and strength. It detailed her background as a former Girl Scout leader and teacher. It explained how she learned Morse code years ago for a communications badge and never forgot it. It showed how that old skill, learned decades ago and probably never expected to be used, saved 4 lives. Lisa's story touched people even more deeply than the original rescue story. Women's groups praised her courage. Girl Scout organizations shared her story as an example of why learning diverse skills matters. Education advocates talked about the importance of teaching practical emergency skills in schools. Lisa herself gave one interview from her sister's house. She was soft-spoken and humble, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. But she had an important message to share. "I want people to know that you never know when something you learn will become important," she said. "I learned Morse code when I was in my 20s. I never thought I would use it. But when I was in that basement with my children and my father, tied up and scared, it was the only way I could call for help. It saved us." She also thanked David and Sarah publicly. "They saved our lives. If they had ignored that signal or assumed it was nothing, I don't know what would have happened to us. They paid attention. They took action. They are true heroes." Cena visited Lisa and her family the same week he met the Martinezes, just as he had promised. He brought toys for her children, who were 6-year-old Minjun and 8-year-old Soyeon. He brought flowers for Lisa and spent time talking with Mr. Chen about his radio hobby. "Your daughter is one of the strongest people I've ever met," John told Mr. Chen. "You raised her right." Mr. Chen, who spoke limited English, nodded with tears in his eyes. Through Lisa translating, he told John about his own experience in the Korean War as a radio operator. That was why he kept the old equipment in his basement. It reminded him of his service and his youth. John listened to every word, asking questions and showing genuine interest. Before he left, he set up a fund through his foundation to help the Chen family relocate to a new home. The old house held too many bad memories now. Lisa could not imagine living there again, and neither could the children. "No family should have to stay in a place where they were traumatized," John said. "Let me help you start fresh somewhere new." The fund he established provided enough money for a down payment on a new house in a different neighborhood. It also covered moving expenses, new furniture, and the costs of breaking their lease on the old house. John's foundation coordinated with local real estate agents to help Lisa find a safe, comfortable home for her family. But John did something else that touched Lisa even more deeply. He connected her with a nonprofit organization that taught self-defense and emergency preparedness courses. The organization offered free classes for trauma survivors, teaching them skills to feel more confident and safe in their daily lives. "What happened to you was not your fault," John told Lisa when he arranged the connection. "But I know that feeling helpless and scared never really goes away completely. These classes won't erase what happened, but they might help you feel more in control of your safety going forward." Lisa enrolled in the classes and brought Minjun and Soyeon with her to the age-appropriate sessions. Learning practical skills helped all of them process their trauma. Minjun learned how to call 911 and what information to give. So-yeon learned basic self-defense moves that made her feel less afraid. Lisa learned advanced emergency communication and home security practices. Mr. Chen, despite his age, joined a community emergency response team. He used his radio knowledge to help the team set up communication systems for disaster preparedness. It gave him purpose and helped him feel less helpless about what had happened. The money Cena provided to the Martinez family was not just about immediate bills. David and Sarah used part of it to set up a college savings account for Emma. They had always wanted to save for her education, but there was never enough left over after paying monthly expenses. Now Emma had a foundation for her future. They also used some of the money to take a family vacation once the immediate danger had passed. They went to a beach resort in Clearwater for 4 days. It was Emma's first time seeing the ocean. She squealed with delight when the waves touched her toes and spent hours collecting shells with Sarah. For David and Sarah, those 4 days were a chance to decompress and process everything that had happened. They had been operating in crisis mode for weeks, dealing with threats and fear and constant vigilance. At the beach, they could finally breathe. One evening, after Emma was asleep, they sat on their hotel balcony overlooking the dark ocean. Stars glittered overhead and the sound of waves was soothing. "Do you think things will ever feel normal again?" Sarah asked. David took her hand. "I think this is our new normal. We can't unknow what we know now. We can't go back to thinking bad things only happen to other people. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. We're more aware now, more prepared. And we know we have the courage to act when something's wrong." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad Cena helped us. Not just with the money, but with everything. He didn't have to care about some random family in Tampa, but he did. That's who he is," David said. "He uses his platform and resources to help people. He saw people who needed support and he provided it. That's real heroism." When they returned home from vacation, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The security measures made them feel safe. The financial cushion removed immediate stress. David went back to his regular shifts at the hospital. Sarah returned to her normal schedule at the dental office. But one thing had changed permanently. David started teaching a community class on emergency awareness and basic communication skills. It met once a month at the local library, and it was always full. He taught basic Morse code. Just the essentials. SOS, help, emergency. Simple patterns that could be tapped out on a wall or flashed with a light if someone was in trouble. He taught people to pay attention to unusual patterns and sounds in their neighborhoods. He taught them when to call 911 and when to call the non-emergency line. "You don't need to be a Marine to notice when something's wrong," David told his students. "You just need to be present and aware. You need to trust your instincts when something feels off, and you need to be willing to take action, even if you're not sure, because calling for a welfare check might save someone's life." Lisa Chen started volunteering with Girl Scout troops in her new neighborhood, teaching communication skills and emergency preparedness. She shared her story with the older girls not to scare them, but to empower them with knowledge. "I want girls to know they can be resourceful in scary situations," she explained to the troop leaders. "I want them to have skills they can use if they ever need to call for help in a creative way." She taught Morse code, but also other emergency communication methods. How to leave a trail if you're lost, how to signal for help with mirrors or bright clothing, how to mark safe houses with specific symbols, skills that seemed like games and fun activities, but could save lives in the right circumstances. The Chen family settled into their new home, a ranch-style house with a big backyard where Minjun and So-yeon could play safely. There was no basement, which suited Lisa just fine. She never wanted to go into another basement again. Mr. Chen set up his radio equipment in a spare bedroom instead, teaching his grandchildren about his hobby in a place filled with light and open windows. He connected with other amateur radio operators in the area and joined their weekly check-ins. His experience became part of the community's emergency communication plan. The 2 men who had held the Chen family hostage went to trial 4 months after their arrest. Both were convicted on multiple charges including kidnapping, robbery, and assault. They received sentences of 25 years each, with no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. Lisa attended the sentencing hearing. She had written a victim impact statement and she read it in court with a steady voice. "You took 3 days of our lives," she told the two men. 3 days where my children were terrified, where my father was hurt, where I thought we might die. You thought you could break us. You thought you could take what you wanted and leave us destroyed. But you were wrong. We survived. We're stronger now. And because of what you did, we've learned skills and built relationships that will protect us and others for the rest of our lives. You failed." When she finished reading, the courtroom was silent except for some people quietly crying. Even the judge looked moved. The judge gave the maximum sentence allowed by law. As the bailiffs led the two men away, one of them glanced back at Lisa. She held his gaze unflinching, until he looked away first. Outside the courthouse, David and Sarah were waiting with Mr. Chen. John Cena's foundation had arranged for counselors to be available for anyone who needed support after the difficult hearing. Lisa's children were with their aunt, protected from having to be in the same room as the men who had hurt their family. "It's over," Lisa said when she came out. "They can't hurt us anymore," David hugged her. Sarah did too. Mr. Chen took his daughter's hand and squeezed it, saying something in Korean that Sarah did not understand, but felt in her heart anyway. John Cena called Lisa that evening to check on her. He called David and Sarah too. He had been following the trial and knew the sentencing was happening that day. "I'm proud of all of you," he said. "You turned something terrible into something meaningful. You're helping other people learn from what happened. That takes incredible strength." He told them he was working on a documentary about everyday heroes, people who did extraordinary things in ordinary circumstances. He wanted to feature their story, but only if they were comfortable with it. "It's not about making you famous," John explained. "It's about inspiring other people to pay attention and take action. It's about showing that regular people can make a huge difference." David, Sarah, Lisa, and Mr. Chen all agreed to participate. The documentary film crew came to Tampa and spent several days interviewing them and filming in their homes. They recreated some parts of the story, including showing how the baby monitor picked up the Morse code signal. The documentary was released 6 months later at a film festival and then distributed online through John Cena's social media channels. It reached millions of people worldwide. 6 months had passed since the night Sarah first heard the strange crackling through the baby monitor. In that time, everything had changed, yet somehow life felt more normal than ever. The Martinez family still lived in the same house on Maple Street, but it was different now. The new security system made them feel protected. The motion sensor lights lit up the yard whenever anyone approached. The camera doorbell meant they always knew who was visiting before they opened the door. These were small things, but they brought peace of mind. Emma was 2 years old now, running and talking in full sentences. She had no memory of the night that changed her parents' lives. To her, John Cena was just a nice man who gave her a stuffed toy and appeared in some photos on the living room wall. She would learn the full story when she was older, but for now, she was just a happy toddler who loved playing with her toys and reading books before bed. David's community classes on emergency awareness had grown beyond what he ever expected. What started as a monthly meeting at the library had turned into regular classes at the community center. The local college and even some businesses that wanted their employees trained in basic emergency communication. David taught them all, often with Sarah helping to organize and manage the growing program. "We've probably trained over 500 people by now," David said one evening as he and Sarah reviewed their class rosters. "That's 500 people who know basic Morse code, who know to pay attention to unusual patterns, who might save someone's life someday." Sarah smiled. "You're making a real difference. I'm proud of you." The classes brought in a small income too, which helped their financial situation. Some organizations paid for David to teach their groups. Others made donations to support the program. It was not enough for David to quit his hospital job, but it gave them some financial breathing room and a sense of purpose. The Chen family had fully settled into their new home across town. It was a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and friendly neighbors. Minjun and Soyeon had adjusted well, making new friends and starting to move past the trauma of what happened. Lisa had become a sought-after speaker at schools and community events. She talked about emergency preparedness, teaching children and adults alike about creative ways to call for help if traditional methods were not available. She had even written a children's book about a girl who uses Morse code to solve a mystery, turning her experience into something that could educate and empower young readers. Mr. Chen thrived in his new community. His ham radio hobby had connected him with a whole network of people who shared his interest. He spent hours each week talking to radio operators around the world, and he had become an essential part of the local emergency communication network. When a hurricane threatened the coast that summer, Mr. Chen's radio equipment helped coordinate relief efforts when cell towers went down. The documentary that Cena's team produced had an impact beyond what anyone expected. It was shared millions of times across social media platforms. Schools showed it in classrooms. Community organizations used it for training. Law enforcement agencies referenced it when teaching about the importance of welfare checks and community awareness. The documentary led to real changes. Several baby monitor companies updated their systems to include alerts for unusual signal patterns. Some even added basic Morse code detection features that would notify parents if a distress signal was picked up. These features might never be used, but they existed now as a safety net. Inspired by Sarah's experience, Girl Scout councils across the country brought back communication badges and expanded their emergency preparedness programs. Lisa's story had shown that skills learned in childhood could save lives decades later. Enrollment in these programs increased dramatically, with both girls and boys wanting to learn skills that might help them in an emergency. Cena stayed in touch with both families. He called every few months to check in and see how everyone was doing. When Emma's second birthday arrived, a large package showed up at the Martinez house. Inside were more toys, books, and a letter from John congratulating Emma on her birthday and reminding David and Sarah how proud he was of them. "Your family changed lives," John wrote in the letter. "Never forget that what you did mattered. Keep teaching others. Keep making your community safer. That's the real heroism." John also continued supporting the Chen family. When Lisa's book was published, he promoted it on his social media accounts, leading to thousands of sales and putting the book on several bestseller lists. The royalties from the book gave Lisa financial independence and the ability to reduce her hours at her teaching job, so she could focus more on her speaking engagements and volunteer work. For Lisa's birthday, John sent her a framed certificate appointing her as an honorary spokesperson for his foundation's emergency preparedness initiative. It was a symbolic gesture, but it meant the world to Lisa. She hung it in her home office where she could see it every day. The relationship between the Martinez and Chen families had grown into something beautiful. They spent holidays together now. Emma played with Minjun and Soyeon, looking up to them like older siblings. The adults gathered for dinner parties and barbecues, laughing and sharing stories. On the first anniversary of the rescue, they all gathered at the Martinez house for a quiet dinner. No media, no cameras, just two families sharing a meal and remembering how far they had come. "I think about that night a lot," Sarah said as they sat around the table after dinner. Emma was playing with Minjun and Soyeon in the living room, their laughter carrying through the house. "I think about how easily I could have ignored that sound, how I almost didn't record it or call David." "But you did," Lisa said, reaching across the table to take Sarah's hand. "You trusted your instincts. You paid attention. You saved us." Mr. Chen spoke in Korean and Lisa translated. "My father says that night was terrifying, but it also showed him that there are good people in the world. People who care about their neighbors. People who take action when something is wrong. He says David and Sarah represent the best of humanity." David wiped his eyes, trying not to cry. "We were just doing what anyone should do, what we hoped someone would do for us if we were in trouble. But most people wouldn't," Lisa said gently. "Most people would assume it was nothing. Most people would ignore it. You didn't. That makes you special." The baby monitor that had picked up the distress signal was no longer in their house. True to David's promise, they had donated it to the Smithsonian Institution's collection of objects that made history. It sat in a climate-controlled storage facility now, preserved as a reminder of how ordinary objects can play roles in extraordinary events. The museum had created a small display about the rescue, featuring the baby monitor along with information about Morse code, emergency communication, and the importance of community awareness. School groups visiting the museum often stopped at the display, and tour guides told the story of how the Martinez family saved their neighbors. Emma's college fund, started with money from Cena's gift, continued to grow. David and Sarah added to it when they could, and some of the income from David's teaching went into the account. By the time Emma was old enough for college, She would have a solid foundation for her education. But more valuable than the money was the lesson Emma would grow up learning. Her parents had shown her through their actions what it meant to be a good neighbor, to pay attention to the world around you, and to help others when they needed it. These were values that could not be bought or taught through lectures. They were lived experiences that would shape who Emma became. David's dream of opening a more formal emergency preparedness training center was slowly becoming real. With support from Cena's foundation and grants from local organizations, he had begun the process of establishing a nonprofit organization dedicated to teaching emergency communication and community awareness skills. The center would offer free classes to the community, bringing in experts on various emergency preparedness topics. It would have equipment for hands-on training, including radio equipment that Mr. Chen had agreed to help teach with. It would be a place where people could learn skills that might save lives someday. Lisa had agreed to be on the board of directors for the center, bringing her educational experience and her powerful story to help shape the organization's mission. Her book sales would fund scholarships for people who wanted to take advanced training courses but could not afford them. Sarah had quit her job at the dental office to work full-time, managing the center's operations. It paid less than her old job, but it was more meaningful. She coordinated classes, managed registrations, handled communications, and helped David turn his vision into reality. Working together toward a shared goal had brought them closer as a couple. The two men who had terrorized the Chen family were in prison, where they would remain for many years. Their family members who had sent threats to the Martinez family had been prosecuted and sentenced to probation and community service. The threats had stopped completely. The danger was over, but the legacy of that October night continued to spread. The Martinez family received letters and emails from people all over the world who had been inspired by their story. Some people shared their own stories of noticing something wrong and taking action. Others wrote to say they had learned Morse code because of the documentary and now taught it to their own children. One letter came from a woman in Oregon who had heard strange knocking patterns coming from her neighbor's apartment. Remembering the Martinez family's story, she called for a wellness check. Police found an elderly man who had fallen and could not reach his phone. He had been knocking on the wall in a pattern, hoping someone would hear. The woman's attention and willingness to call for help saved his life. Stories like these reminded David and Sarah why their experience mattered. It was not about being famous or getting recognition. It was about creating a culture where people paid attention and took care of each other. It was about showing that ordinary people could do extraordinary things simply by being aware and willing to act. On quiet evenings, after Emma was asleep and the house was still, Sarah sometimes thought about that October night. She thought about the crackling sound that had bothered her so much. She thought about how close she had come to ignoring it, to dismissing it as nothing important. She thought about Lisa in that basement, desperately tapping out a message she hoped someone would hear. She thought about Min Jun and So Yan, scared and not understanding what was happening. She thought about Mr. Chen, worried about his daughter and grandchildren. And she thought about how different their lives would be if she had just turned off the monitor and gone to bed that night. But she had not turned it off. She had listened. She had paid attention. She had acted. That choice had saved 4 lives. That choice had brought Cena into their lives and changed their future. That choice had created ripples that spread far beyond their small house on Maple Street, inspiring people around the world to be more aware, more engaged, more willing to help. David came up behind her one evening as she stood at the window lost in thought. He wrapped his arms around her waist and rested his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "Everything. How much has changed. How different our lives are now. Do you wish it had never happened? That we could go back to how things were before?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering. "No, I don't. What happened was terrible for Lisa and her family. But we helped them, and now we're helping so many others. I wouldn't trade that." David kissed her temple. "Me neither. We found our purpose." Upstairs, Emma stirred in her sleep, and the baby monitor on the nightstand crackled with the sound of her breathing. It was a new monitor, a simple one that did not pick up signals from far away. They did not need fancy features anymore. But Sarah would never forget the sound of that other monitor, the one that had carried a desperate plea for help across the darkness. She would never forget the pattern of dots and dashes that spelled out SOS. She would never forget the feeling of knowing someone needed help and being able to provide it. That memory would stay with her forever. A reminder that paying attention mattered, that trusting your instincts mattered, that being willing to act even when you were not sure could mean the difference between tragedy and survival. The night grew late. David and Sarah went upstairs together, checking on Emma one last time before going to bed themselves. Their daughter slept peacefully, safe and loved, unaware of how close she came to living in a world where her parents had ignored a strange sound and moved on with their evening. But they had not ignored it. They had listened. They had acted. They had saved lives, and because of that, they would spend the rest of their own lives helping others learn to do the same. That was their legacy. That was their gift to the world. The baby monitor crackled softly in the darkness, carrying only the gentle sound of Emma's breathing. No distress signals, no desperate calls for help, just the peaceful sound of a child sleeping safely in her home, protected by parents who would always pay attention, always listen, and always be ready to help when help was needed. That was enough. That was everything.